Why don't we start? And this is George Dingledine interviewing Thomas F. Snyder at the Wabash County Public Library on Tuesday, May 14th, 1985. And Tom, the first question I'm going to ask you is, why don't you give me a little background on yourself, your family, where you were born, and all that information.
Okay, I was born in 1948 in Peru, Indiana. My father is Frederick Snyder, and my mother, Betty Snyder. She is originally from Kokomo.
Maiden name.
Denman. Denman. And my father was in World War II, was in Pearl Harbor when the attack was made aboard ship. And was aboard ship for 18 months, chasing Japanese submarines on a destroyer. And my father was adopted. He was adopted by Tom Snyder, who I'm named after. He was originally from the Treaty area south of Wabash, and he was in World War I. He was had been gassed with mustard gas, and resulted years later of his lungs just finally giving out, and he died of actual suffocation from the mustard gas. And he's married to my grandmother, Vernie Nee was her name when she died. Her maiden name was Vernie Schroyer. And she married Tom Snyder, and then after he passed away, she married John Nee. And he was stepfather to my dad when he was there. And of course, after Dad was out of high school, he joined the Navy, and that was prior to World War II. He had to enlist for 6 years then, the only way he could get in. And just happened to be on the right ship at Pearl Harbor at the right time and seen the Arizona blow up. And I guess, a couple other ships too there. So he was right in the middle of that. And as far as my mother's side of the house, she was from Kokomo. Her father was Ward Denman. I never knew my grandmother. She died following the next child after my mother was born. And now my grandfather also passed away a few years ago. And it was kind of he was renting property off of my grandmother on my father's side, and it's how my mother and father got together. Kind of my dad come home on leave from the service, and when he went in the service, Mom was still in high school, and a little girl, in fact, I think maybe she was just a freshman in high school. They're 5 years apart in age, and he come home on leave, and she was graduated from high school and grew up big girl then. So on about 2 weeks leave, he ended up getting married. The chances of surviving marriage is very small, but they're still married. They had their 40th wedding anniversary. Went to live with him in Norfolk, Virginia, on the naval base. And the odds of a marriage lasting that way didn't seem very good odds, but it did. That worked out.
So when were you born, and where, and what was your upbringing and so forth?
I was born in 1948 in Peru, May the 11th. I was raised in southern Wabash County, just north of Old Somerset, before the Reservoir. That's when a little reservoir was put in. And was probably associated with Somerset more than any other place, Old Somerset. my parents owned property, a store in Somerset, and they also owned a farm half a mile north of Somerset. And so spent a lot of time in Somerset as a kid growing up. Went to school there for 8 years before the consolidation into Southwood. Then I started the first year of Southwood was a school, and I was a freshman. Big contrast, big adjustment for 8th graders to a freshman. Had to go to an all-new school, and those that remember the first year of Southwood, the school wasn't finished. Cafeteria wasn't done. We had to carry our lunches, and I didn't even have some of the walls finished. The ceilings weren't done. What a way to start school, let alone an adjustment going to a new school. But, I have 2 sisters, Barbara, and she has multiple sclerosis and paralyzed from the waist down. She's a year younger than me. And then I have a younger sister, Beverly. She presently is in Marion and owns a beauty shop in Marion. And my parents are both retired. Father was a minister. He retired 2 years ago, I guess it would be. That was the fall of 83. He had a heart attack, and they told him he couldn't do her no more, so he retired from ministry. And he was preaching at 12 Mile, Indiana, and Leslie Parsonage over there. Had been there 7 years. And my mother, she, various jobs. Of course, my father, while he preached, he also did a lot of other things. He drove oil trucks with Wabash County Farm Bureau. President of the Relocation and Development Corporation of Somerset when they moved to town. He farmed. Was on the health board of Wabash County for a while. I think he worked with you for a while. And my mother worked at Emma Lou's dress shop for a long time, quite a few years when she was here in business in Wabash. My mother also cooked at Southwood High School, and she was head dietitian also at Somerset High School before the consolidation.
All right, now you're out of high school. Basically, you're out of high school in what year?
I graduated in 1966.
And what happened?
Well, as soon as I graduated, the Vietnam War was very prominent in the media. We were seeing it already on the news in 66. 65 had increased, and we was really starting to see it quite a bit. And I was not planning on going to college as far as I was planning on taking some business courses, going to business college, not a 4-year course. And I was primarily doing that, which I went to IBM Data Processing School in Kansas City in 67. But prior to that, I knew I was going to have to get a job, and so the fall of 66, in September, I was hired on at Chrysler Corporation at Kokomo transmission plant. And worked there and took a leave of absence, went to IBM Data Processing School in Kansas City in 67. Come back hoping to get a job in business field somewhere with Chrysler, and they didn't have an opening without me having to move to Indianapolis at the time, and I couldn't see the expense of moving to Indianapolis would justify the pay, so I stayed where I was at, making relatively good money in the factory, and more money than I'd ever made at that time. And so, in the background of my mind was every night when you listen to the news was the Vietnam War and the draft. And of course, in '66 and '67, the lottery draft had not come into play until '69. So it was still on a local board, draft board's doings that they was going by birth dates and alphabetical order, I think mostly, and they was doing what they had to do. The main thing that happened to me, I was pretty sure I was going to end up having to go. I was kind of hoping I wouldn't, but pretty sure I would. So, in February of '68, a tad offensive happened in Vietnam. And the North Vietnamese even got into Saigon, hit the embassy in Saigon. And a lot of American GIs were killed. And I was pretty sure then, when President Johnson come out and said that he wanted so many more thousand men to fight the communists, that my name would probably be coming up pretty quick then. And sure enough, it did. Just July, I left for basic training. Prior to that, of course, I went to Indianapolis for a physical, and kind of a different experience there.
Why?
Well, it was most of the guys you went down with was guys you knew. Those guys from Wabash County loaded you up in a bus from the draft board center early in the morning. Had to be there to report. And some of the guys you were going down with were guys that were going to go on in. And they were saying goodbye to their families as they were getting on the bus. And you were sitting there thinking, well, I'm going down for my first time just for my physical, but the next time that's going to be me. And then some of them, of course, they were pretty sure they wasn't going to be able to pass the physical. And they were making kind of a joke out of the whole thing. It wasn't very serious to them. And I knew one guy that was in school with me. He was drunker than a skunk that morning. They couldn't hardly get him on the bus. He'd been celebrating all night, and he was one of them that he had a hand messed up in an accident when he was younger, and he was pretty sure they wouldn't take him. He couldn't use his index finger hardly at all on his right hand, and he had 3 doctor statements with going back to the medical history. But anyway, we got down there and went through the physical. Sure enough, it was probably about a month later, I got my letter saying greetings. And I knew what it was when I got it out of the mailbox. So I fell right into the pattern of what I'd seen happening to the guys prior. And so we went down, went through the physical, and I didn't have any physical problems. Went right through it, flying colors. Unfortunately, I think. Well, I don't know really. Anyway, then I went to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. After I was drafted, and that was in July of '68. Then I was sent to Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Spent 8 weeks in medical training.
You did your basic then in Fort Campbell and then on to...
No, I did my basic also in Fort Sam Houston.
Yeah, okay, sure.
And 8 weeks of medical training. And like I said in the other interview I did with the paper, 8 weeks of training didn't seem to hardly train you very well for what you was going to be up against. It was such a broad training, they had to train you. I was a medical corpsman, and they had to train you not only for a medic in the field, but they also had to train you for a medic in all types of different situations. A medic on a helicopter where you were transporting patients. You had to learn how to load and unload helicopters with patients, ambulatory and litter, and that information I never really used to you in. And that was all part of your 8 weeks training. And,
Why did you go into the medical corps? Did you go for volunteers, or what was the reason?
well, I had signed up through the local draft board as an objector to bearing arms. I was in a classification 1AO. Now 1A was eligible for military draft, and 1AO was available for military draft with an objection to bearing arms.
Had this been some conviction that you had all your life, or?
Well, I'd been raised pretty much that I should be an objection to the military service altogether.
In what church?
The First Brethren Church is what I was raised in. I attended the College Corner Church in the southwest part of Wabash County, and down next to the Mississinewa Reservoir still. And it was their belief to an objection completely to the military service. In fact, they were even registered in Washington. The denomination was registered. And an objection to a conscientious objector and objection to military service was usually stayed here in the States and fulfilled his duty in a hospital here. But I didn't really go along with that too much, and in fact I had quite a round with the fellow that was in charge of the denomination of service, elective service through our denomination. He called me from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
You lived in Florida. Sent me a whole bunch of information, told me I was wrong for taking the stand I was taking, and I politely told him on the phone that he wasn't me, and I had thought it over pretty much, and thought I had an obligation to the country, and I had an obligation as a military person, and that there was a place for me. The country had provided a place, and I was willing to go that route.
What was your, we're getting off track here a little bit, but this is good because this is another area that we've never explored. What was your parents' reaction? Now, your father was a minister at this time. What denomination?
First Brethren.
Okay.
He was with First Brethren Church, and
Although he'd been to Pearl Harbor and
yeah, he'd been in the service. Of course, at that time he wasn't a minister, but didn't really get into the ministry. Well, he started out as a lay minister when he was in his early 40s, and but was always active in church and was involved with church work all of his life, even after following him coming home. And that's primarily due to his stepfather, John Nee. John Nee was the superintendent of the Sunday school at College Corner Church, and took Dad to church at College Corner. So that's kind of the background on that situation. But I don't know, Dad really didn't say a whole lot. He kind of left it up to me. He said to do whatever I felt was right for me. And
he had no objection one way or the other.
no.
And your mother wasn't really into the discussion.
Well, of course she
Other than
did.
what your father said.
She kind of had hinted that she kind of would like for me to take the stand that the church followed as a conscientious objector and stay here in the States and work in a hospital someplace here in the States, which many of them were doing at that time.
Did you run onto any problems in training or anything?
No.
No.
Well, at Fort Campbell, I went before a board down there, guys that I guess it's a standard procedure, and they just ask some questions basically. But never was really much, I never had any other harassment except for they kind of give us dirty details once in a while. They put us on details where rest of them seems like we was painting barracks in the same places over and over again where we just painted them just before. But
That didn't bother you?
make a difference to me.
Did you?
I had my time to put in while I was in. Painting was a lot better than a lot of other things.
Was there any religious support from the chaplains or anything at this period? In Fort Campbell?
No.
They didn't know about you? Or?
Oh yeah, they knew about the stand and everything, but there was no, they were military people too, and they had their job to do, and they never, there was nothing said pro or con usually about the situation one way or the other.
So then you go down the.
I was only at Fort Campbell for 2 weeks.
In the Conscientious.
Mm-hmm.
What does the basic training consist of in this year?
Well, we did everything but the actual firing a weapon. We went through all we had self-defense. We had all the physical part of it. We went through bivouac. We did everything but fire a gun. We never fired a weapon. We went through all the marching drills. In fact, we probably went through a little more in that respect, and because of not having the weapons trained. We had a lot of physical exercise. We had obstacle courses they put us through quite heavily.
So you guys were really in good shape?
I was probably in the best shape I was ever in when I got out of basic training.
And then you went into the medical training phase of it, which you mentioned, and went into all this. And then what happened?
Well,
Incidentally, did everyone know that they were going to Vietnam after they got there?
Yeah.
Did you ever think that you might wind up in Germany?
No. There was, you had that hope. There was always a hope in the back of your mind. Oh, I hope I go to Europe, or I hope I go to Japan, or I hope I go anywhere but Vietnam. But you knew pretty much that your chances of not going to Vietnam was pretty small. And basically pretty much give us that. They was telling us, we were watching classes graduating ahead of us in AIT, in advanced training, and we'd hear from them how many of them, percentage of them was going to Nam, and they was almost all of them going to Vietnam, and the ones that weren't going to Vietnam were ones that were they were routed, they were on their way to Vietnam, but they were being held over somewhere temporarily. Some of them were going to Japan, some to the Philippines, but they were going to end up in Vietnam.
What happened after your medical training?
Okay, about 2 weeks prior to my graduation from Army Medical School, they were starting to talk about our assignment, where we would be assigned. And approximately 10 days before I graduated, I got my orders that I was going to Vietnam. And I knew before I graduated I was going to Vietnam. Now, this is probably one of the toughest parts of Vietnam. You train with a group of guys who were all medical corpsmen, and as soon as you got out of that training, you didn't go and train with a unit that you were going to go with to combat drills. You were sent as an individual. I had my orders. I was going to Vietnam. I had no idea where I was going in Vietnam. Didn't have any idea who I'd be with. I didn't know whether any of these guys that I went through training with, I would ever see them again, if they would happen to be in a unit where I'd be or not. They completely, you just didn't know, because that's the way they did Vietnam. So I come home on leave. I had 2 weeks leave. I graduated in November from medical training, and my orders were to report to Oakland, California on December the 14th, 1958. And I was looking forward to coming home for 2 weeks. That was one thing I was looking forward to. And I flew home and spent 2 weeks running around Wabash County and seeing about all the friends I could see, and even went to a party where 2 other guys had orders for Vietnam. and one of them's name's out here on our memorial, Victor Poor. I was at a party with him, and we both had orders for Vietnam, and he was killed over there. And then the other guy was from Grant County, and he was killed over there. Now, the three of us that had orders for Vietnam, I was the only one at that party that night. I was the only one that come back alive. And my folks didn't even send anything to me to tell me about when Richie got killed in Grant County. They was afraid to send a letter and tell me he was killed over there. They did tell me that Victor had been, and then they said they were just going to wait till I got home before they told me about him. So, it was right before Christmas, '68, so had a lot of Christmas parties and stuff. And since a lot of us was going to Nam, well, they were going to have Christmas parties for us, going away parties and stuff. So, went to.
What was it like at the airport when you last went to Denver? Mother and father and your sisters came down.
Yeah, we went to
right before
Chicago.
Christmas. Oh, Chicago. Okay.
I didn't want them to go that far because, well, it was in December and weather could have been gotten bad on us, basically going to Chicago, but it wasn't too bad that year. It was about, I guess I left on about the 13th. And
wasn't a Friday, I hope.
I don't remember. I know I had to be in Oakland the 14th. So, I'm not sure. It might have been the early morning of the 14th. So we went to my girlfriend. She was from North Manchester at the time. I had my parents. I think that was, I can't really remember. I don't think one of my sisters went with us up to the airport. It was just my girlfriend and my parents went with me up to O'Hara. And, yeah, it was kind of hard. It was, you didn't know whether you'd ever see him again. You was hearing reports on the news while you was home on leave. There were so many kills that night on the news, and then you'd hear how many body counts that they got from the North Vietnamese. It sounded to me like a lot of killing. And here I was going right into it. Didn't have any idea where to. So it was kind of tough to have to get on that plane and know that you might not ever come back. But
did Mother ever tell you what her reaction was later?
No, my mother is she's pretty strong. She's probably stronger than my dad in that respect. But it was they wrote me a letter later, and they said it was an awful quiet, long trip back from O'Hara down to Wabash. And I told them it was an awful quiet trip from that airplane, except for the airplane engines, all the way to California too. Mm-hmm. I hadn't been any place very much. I was in Wabash County. I'd probably been out of the state a half a dozen times or so, and that's about all. And we used to go down to Indianapolis for the races, and that was about the biggest highlight I ever had. And so got to Oakland, California. Of course, there was a lot of other military people getting off and on planes and stuff. And you kind of didn't feel too out of place because you knew a lot of them was doing the same thing you was doing, but you just didn't know who they were or know anything about them. And got to the station there at Oakland, California, where the assignment station, the overseas assignment. And it's loaded. And I did meet some of the guys that went through training with, of course. I'm not sure how they had it set up on it, and whether it was alphabetical order there or whether it was date of birth or what it was. I was 20 years old at the time, and probably was about average in age for most of them. There was quite a few guys that was empty themselves. There was a lot of guys that had been signing up for the service that was 18, 19 years old. And so, and Wabash County wasn't drafting down that young. You know, they was drafting usually 20-year-olds and then some guys even older. But we were probably a little bit different than some other counties in all over the United States anyway. And so we got to see some of the guys I knew, and some basic training out there. And of course, we all knew where we was going, and they took all your.
You get out with them and you meet some of the guys that you were in basic with, and then medical training, and what happens? They take your uniforms away from you.
Yeah, they took the stateside uniform away because we're going to be issued a completely different type of uniform for overseas stations in Vietnam.
Okay.
And they issue new uniforms and put you on the plane and fly on commercial airlines. I flew Braniff International, stewardesses, wasn't a military plane, commercial airline. Flew to, of all places, Hawaii, about 3 o'clock in the morning, landed there and refueled there for about 35, 40 minutes. Beautiful island at 3 o'clock in the morning. Mostly dark. Then we took off and we landed in the Philippines at Clark Air Force Base. And it was real early in the morning there. Well, it was daylight, the sun was up there, but it's hot, really hot. Because it was fairly warm even at 3 o'clock in the morning in Hawaii. And this was 14th, well, about 17th of December. And when I landed at, when we left the park, we flew on into Long Binh, which is just north side of Saigon. And got out of the nice, cool airliner onto a hot pavement, down some steps, and they routed you on the buses. And you were scared to death because the buses were all screened in windows, and there's all these Vietnamese people running around out here, and you've been seeing it on TV that the Vietnamese is the enemy, but here's the Vietnamese running around here on this around this airport. And they had jobs working for the United States government, and a little bit confusing. You didn't know whether they were friend or foe, but you hope they were friends. And they more hurry up and wait, like the Army would put you in line, and they finally got around to feeding us something for a while, and I spent one night there, and then they get sent to an assignment center, and then they assigned you to a unit. And I was assigned to the 12th Exact Hospital, and it was halfway between Saigon and the Cambodian border. It was also the headquarters of the 25th Infantry Division, which we were not really associated with, only we were a hospital for those men if they were wounded. And we were a part of the 44th Medical Brigade. The Medical Corps is kind of separate from like the infantry divisions and artillery divisions and so forth. And I flew on what they called a Caribou, small twin-engine plane that they had left over from World War II, I think. They patched a whole bunch of them up. I don't know whether they was World War II. I know they used them in Korea anyway. And they were still using them. But they could take off and land on short runways, and they were small cargo planes. We got out, landed at TQ runway. Got out, had no idea where you was at. You was always asking somebody, where's TQ at? How do you spell TQ? You know, they never had heard of it even before we got over there, and then they tell you you're going to TQ. And It's capital C-U and capital C-H-I.
Just like a thing.
Just like it sounded, yes. And base camp was built outside of a little town, and the little town was the name of Tuskegee. And come to find out, the base camp had been, like many base camps, and a lot of military installations, had been a previous military installation of either the French or the Vietnamese during prior to the United States going over there. Mostly in Ho Chi Minh regime. Come to find out, the whole area was undermined with tunnels. And they tried to fill most of them in when they built the base camp, but they tunneled in on us once while I was over there. And got there, and they found us. Of course, I was going to 12 back, and I happened to be going with about 4 other guys that went through medical training with us. Were assigned to the same hospital. So that was kind of a boost to all of us, really. And because at least we would know somebody that we had known for 16 weeks prior to that. And got there, and right before Christmas, I had to take some intensive training. They gave us all kinds of training, additional training once we got over there to kind of adjust to Vietnam. And I was coming back from that training, and they brought in Bob Hope there that day when I was coming back from the training. I was a long ways back. There was a big crowd, of course. And, but that was about the 21st, 22nd, that's before Christmas of December in '63. And I could see Bob Hope at a long ways off, but I could see him. I knew I'd seen him. But we stopped and was going to watch for a while, and he was standing there, and pretty soon they started getting some incoming rockets. And they hustled Bob Hope and all the Les Brown and his band and all of them, and got them out of there real quick. And so I went back over towards the hospital area, and the barracks, which we stayed in over there, they called it a hoop. We stayed in a hoop, and there was about more than 10 to 12 men had a bunk in each one of these buildings. And they were screened halfway up the walls to the ceiling, or to the roof. You had a metal roof, no ceilings, and just a rafters down. And then they were just a wood siding on halfway on down. And you had sandbags all the way around the outside, and they had a wood floor on them to keep you up out of the mud. I had it pretty nice, really, and compared to a lot of the guys. But the first night I was assigned to my bunk, I looked up and there were gaping holes in the metal roof. Scrap metal come through the roof. And I said, what happened here? Right above my bunk. And one of the guys had been over there for quite a while. He said, well, months ago we got round hit us right outside the end of the hoop here, and scrap metal from the rocket had floated up through the roof and put some nasty holes, and they just, to fix it, they just put new tin over the top of it and left the holes underneath, and you could see them from underneath. So that was kind of the thing that bothered you, laying there in your bunk looking up there at them scrap metal holes, and you just getting over there, boy, what am I looking forward to? So I got moved from that bunk as soon as I could move. When one of the guys, his time was up, he moved, was sleeping in the hoop I was in, and his tour was up, he left the vacancy in another bunk. I moved across and down where he got out from under the hoop and the holes. So, but I had worked in a hospital when I first started working. I worked in a recovery room and surgical. That's where I was assigned first, more or less as training. I worked there for a little over a month and a half, I think about 6 weeks or something. And man, what an education! You were seeing amputees, and you were seeing the worst of it. You had to take vital signs on patients every 5 minutes when they first come out of the recovery room. And as they were in there longer and they were coming to, you would go up to 15 minutes, and then you had to work with the nurses on finding a place for them on another ward someplace after they were clear awake. And just listening to some of the comments some of the guys had, when they were awake and wake up, and they knew when they went in they were going to come, when they woke up they would be minus a leg or 2 legs or an arm, or something was going to be missing when they woke up from surgery. And just listening to some of them, that in itself is an education that you were trying to take care of them at the same time.
Is there any particular one that stand out, or any one?
I do remember one guy, and the only thing that we could say was just a tragedy of war. He had a relatively minor wound, and I can't even remember what it was at the time, but they had to slow his heart rate down to do the surgery. And of course they had him on a respirator to keep him breathing. And we were so busy in there, we just get so many coming in. We had 3 surgery rooms, and if all 3 were working, you just get them coming after us so fast, and you had to do vital signs on them every 5 minutes, and I just had you over. You just couldn't hardly keep up. And somehow there was no reason. His wound wasn't that serious, but I'll never will forget it. The nurses, man, they even broke down. I couldn't believe it. The respirator went off for some reason, and he died. He lost him. And there was no sense in it. It was just human error. But we just didn't have the time to check on him as quick as we should have. And once we found out the respirator had quit working, mechanical breakdown on the respirator, it was too late for him. Mm-hmm. And there he had a relatively, when he went into surgery, they told him, this is nothing. You'll be all over with and fine tomorrow, And there was other cases similar to that, but just, the situation being that you were so overpowered and understaffed, didn't have enough people. You get so many at once on top of you, and you just didn't give them the proper care. But I didn't work there only about a month and a half. Of course, I continued on. Somebody else took my place. I had to do the work over there too. I transferred to a medical force. And mainly took care of malaria, hepatitis, and minor wounds, any diseases or anything other than serious wounds. And I got to be very good at starting IVs and drawing blood, because you had to draw blood on malaria patients quite a bit. Of course, when you got back in the States, you wasn't allowed to do that. Didn't have a license to do it, but I did it for a year over there, and had nurses come and ask me to start IVs because they couldn't get them going. They couldn't do it, and that happened quite often after I'd been there a while and had the experience of doing it. And we lost 5 guys died while I was in the medical ward. Worked on one guy for half an hour, massage CPR, and still lost him. And experiences like that, being right there, what you seen in the hospital wasn't actually out on the battlefield, but you seen the results of it. And it's probably just not as traumatic. Especially if the guy had, like this one particular one that I worked on for so long, He'd been with us for, I don't know, about 10 days, I reckon. We didn't keep him very long. We were in an evacuation hospital. Usually, if we could get them back on their feet and going in 2 weeks, they either went back to duty or we sent them on back to another hospital if they wasn't getting any better or condition was worsening or something. They couldn't go back to duty. They need to come back to Japan like this. So.
No venereal disease in this area.
Yes, Thursday was VD day. And did a lot of shots, penicillin, handed out a lot of ampicillin pills. We had our own laboratory there at the hospital. We had a outpatient clinic, more or less, for basically Thursday was for the venereal disease. And we've seen syphilis, gonorrhea, and main things we're involved with. I give a few shots for that. Seen some very poor cases of venereal disease. Guys that just let it go and refused to accept that that's what they had. Wouldn't get treatment right away, and they'd let it get pretty bad before they came. And then they'd have to do, we had some that had to start IVs on and give them medication directly to the bloodstream. And that's a pretty broad scope of things that's seen.
Did you see, were you dealing at all with drug abuse or drug abuse?
Yeah.
And what was that? What day was that?
About every day I was over there. Seems like we'd get somebody to come to the realization that he was becoming a short timer, which is the name they give a guy that didn't have much longer in his tour duty. And he was hooked on heroin. He was mainlining heroin, and he could get it over there. And he come to the hospital, and he wanted off of it. He wanted us to cure him real quick before he got back home to the States, so he wouldn't have to worry about getting it over here. Of course, that couldn't happen. Basically, some of the cases I've seen, I had guys, and I can truthfully say that I was rather professional at drawing blood, and I think I was semi-professional at starting IVs. And there was guys that come in with drug abuse that were mainlining. You couldn't find a vein to get a needle in. I couldn't hit a vein. They had hit all the veins on their arms and their legs, trying to put dope into their own veins, and they went through them veins so many times they were calloused to the point that a needle wouldn't function anymore. And you would shove a needle through the skin, and you'd hit the vein, and it'd just roll around the end of the needle. It was so calloused. And just a scar all the way up their arm following that vein, and all the way down the leg. And it was just unbelievable that guys would get to, that. And then the worst part of it was to look at the heroin that they were injecting into their veins. Because they also was looking stuff you ever seen. It's like tar. And they were getting a poor quality, but they didn't care as long as it put them into a different world, I guess. Probably the worst thing I've seen, we were always on call for the emergency room. We worked 12-hour shifts. We worked from 7 to 7, either 7 o'clock at night to 7 o'clock in the morning, or 7 in the morning to 7 at night. Just didn't give you much at a time. You had time to write a letter and go home and sleep, try to get sleep if we wasn't, the artillery units around us wasn't firing a lot of guns, or there wasn't a firefight outside the base camp a ways, which seemed to be quite often. Through the Cobra gunship, a lot of helicopters taking off. We had a big helicopter battalion there, and at CC, helicopters going and coming all the time, and we got used to that noise. Of course, at the hospital, we had death off with medevac Red Crosses on them, landing all the time with patients right at in the entrance of the hospital. And that kind of disrupted your sleep, and then You couldn't stay inside them 10 roof in the afternoon. It's hot. You tried to sleep as much as you could after 7 o'clock. As soon as you got off at 7, you go and get in bed real quick to try to sleep before it got hot in the afternoon. Because then it would just get so hot you couldn't sleep. And when I first went over, it was the hospital was a lot of changes happened. I was there 14 months, and when I first went over, we had some running water, but it was in big tanks that they pumped it up into, and it was just gravity fed. Now that was just a shower, and for basins to shave in. And
No hot water out there.
well, you got in there after the afternoon sunshine had been heating that tank up there if you wanted a hot shower. And you was very conservative on your water because there was a lot of times they ran and tanks ran out of water. They had crews that come around with tank trucks and refill them. Real high in chlorine content, you could smell it. Real strong chlorine. Of course, your bathroom facilities was all out like outside toilets. They hired Vietnamese men, older men usually, and they were on the burning details, and human excrement was burnt. They'd add diesel oil to it and burn it. And then, of course, in monsoon season, it was awful muddy. I was just in mud everywhere, and it just rained all afternoon. And get real hot and steamy, and then it'd start raining, and it'd rain them for about 3 or 4 hours, and then the sun come back out, and just like it was evaporating it all back up in the air again, just steamy. And when I first went over, all we had was the wards where we worked on were just had screens on the side. They were Quonset huts. They were steel Quonset huts. A little more modern than the nice stories you see on TV. They were all tents in Korea. And by the time I left in 14 months, most of it, I think about all of the wards where the patients stayed on had been air conditioned by the South Koreans on our hospital. They'd filled in the screen with plywood and set air conditioners every so often for the patients on the ward. Unfortunately, our places where we stayed were never that way. We still had to, but they did make improvements while I was there. That was from early '69 to late '69.
I would assume the operating rooms were
Operating rooms were air conditioned. Had just been air conditioned in late '68 when I got there. In fact, when I first got there, I think they had just completed the third emergency, or the third surgery room built on. They'd run into cases where they needed a third place where they could have surgery, and they were doing surgery in emergency rooms a lot of times. And I think a while ago I was mentioning the worst thing I'd seen while I was over there. One night I was working my shift, and they called us up to have some help down at the emergency room. And 3 guys were on an armored personnel carrier, and it contained 2 tanks of flamethrower fuel. Had a flamethrower mounted on the front end of it, and they were all down inside this like a steel box on track. And they either took a round or hit a landmine or something, and that fuel exploded, and they were inside there. And I have never seen a human body burn like them guys have burned. All 3 of them died. They were all alive when they come to the hospital. But they were literally cooked all the way through their arms. We couldn't find a vein or start an IV. One was conscious. He was a big, black guy, big Phil. And he lived the longest. And one of the others, he woke up just for a little bit. But that was terrible, man. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. It was just devastating. You couldn't believe it. And there, you could see them. They were completely discharged. and like the one black man, he was talking. You know, there he was laying in that shell of a body. His mind was still good enough that he could talk and talk about things, and worried about his sight. And of course, his eyes were gone, and you know, it was just sad. It was unbelievable. There was nothing you could do, and you know, there they were.
What role does the chaplain play in that?
Well, I didn't have a very good rapport with most chaplains, and probably the worst one I felt was we had a Catholic chaplain, and I had a real run-in one time. He was, as far as I was concerned, he wasn't doing his duty. He was an army man. He was an officer. His main thing was go to the UN Club and buy guys beers and sit there and drink beers with them. And he had as far as I could see, he had an alcohol problem. I never seen him, I don't think, when he didn't have alcohol in his breath. And I confronted him with it one time, and he was going to come down on me pretty hard because he was outranked me a long way. I achieved a Spec 5, E5 rating, and I was only in the Army 19 months. And the main reason, I had a black sergeant, Sergeant Sostic, when I had Sergeant Mattis it was. Sostic was a Spec 4, it was over my training. Sergeant Mattis, he was the last sergeant above me. He was a ward specialist at the hospital. And he first told me when I got over to Vietnam, he said, you keep yourself straight, you come to work on time, and come to work not on drugs, high on drugs, and not drunk on booze. And he says, I'll get you rank as fast as you can ever get it. And he held true to his word. And so most guys was lucky to get Spec 4 in the time that I got Spec 5. And it was just because of the situation over there, and I was a little more dependable than most of the rest of them. So.
Well, did they want to see a chaplain? They didn't care whether they died without consolation?
No, usually the chaplains the chaplains were available. There was both Protestant and Catholic chaplains available.
No Jewish?
I never seen one while I was there. At our particular hospital. Now, I'm sure as the patient got back further, there was, possible, you know, the possibility was more just to have someone at every evacuation hospital is rather possible, I reckon, because it didn't happen anyway. We did have, that was the one way that I got around the Catholic chaplain that was giving me a bad time. There was a Protestant chaplain that outranked him that was over at the 25th Headquarters Division, and he was a lieutenant colonel, and the Catholic chaplain assigned to the Providence Hospital, which was under his jurisdiction, was only a major or a captain, I'm not sure. Maybe he was just a captain. Anyway, he was left rank, and I went over and talked to the lieutenant colonel, and he told me, he says, I'll get her straightened out for you. He says, I know we got a problem there. So. And it resolved itself. I mean, it wasn't all that big a deal. But there was a lot of guys that did ask for a chaplain, and there was usually one, especially at the emergency room. They made themselves available pretty readily. And of course, they was on call all the time. And then they made rounds on the ward in the hospital during the day, too.
How many men would you know to have?
Oh, wow. A very tremendous amount. we had times when we had mass casualties and we had them laying on the sidewalk. And we had times where we would be, the ward I worked on was Ward 27, and it was 28 bed ward. And that's putting them in there pretty close. Because that included, that was one Quonset hut, and that was a road down each side, and there was a nurse's station in the middle there. And we kept that full about the whole time I was over there. And I was on Ward C7, and there was C1 through 7. And then later on, when I was over there, we opened up Ward C8, a Quonset hut next door to it. We added on another ward. And then over on the B wing was that was also where they had the surgery room, and I think there was B7 and B8 was medical wards over there. And most of them, they had a smaller bed capacity over there because there was more seriously wounded.
Capacity of hospital.
Yeah, you're talking about there. I would say then with probably 40 over there, and then down the C side, they kept the hospital wards spread out. We had sidewalks with roofs over them, and kept the hoots or the Quonset huts separated, and they had sandbags around them in case a rocket would hit. They didn't have like 2-story buildings with a bunch of people in them, and they kept spread out that way to lessen the amount of people killed if we had a direct hit.
Did you ever have any rockets?
Oh yeah, yeah. We had I had one hit on the road right behind the hoops where one had hit prior to me getting there that I talked about earlier. It put holes in the roof. One hit right out in the road right behind the hoops there, about it's about 50 feet from the hoop. And metal never hit into the building itself, but it blowed up in the air and then fell back down on the roof, and it was banging around on the roof and made an awful big hole out there in the road. They had to come along and fill the hole in. But
were you in the hoops at this time?
Yeah, I was laying there on the floor with my steel pot on my head and flak jacket on. We was getting incoming rounds, and that was we had the sandbags all around the hoop, just outside your wall. And the best thing for you to do is, you always kept a flak jacket and a steel pot under your bed or right beside your bed. And then you could roll right out and get it on top of you and on your head. And then if we continue to get a rocket attack, we had bunkers outside if you want to take the chance to shoot around and crawl out and get in the bunker. Well, you could do that too. Which I did a few times, and it seemed like it was going to be attacked for quite a period of time. But usually, the Vietnamese in 69, when I was there, early 69, they'd hit us with half a dozen to a dozen rockets, and then they'd be gone. By the time we got the helicopter, they'd send helicopter gunships up, and they'd shoot flares in the air and light everything up looked like daylight. The flares, tried to see them, and they'd get helicopters, gunships up there. They'd be gone. They'd run, take off, and they'd never find them. Next day, there was old Papa Son out there in his rice paddy working, but he's the one that was probably shooting us the night before. How did you know? And then we had one hit right behind the ward where I worked in the hospital. I wasn't working that particular night. I was at the coop, but it injured. We had a South Korean, which was our ally. He worked for us at the hospital in our. We have generator systems for our hospital, and he was a generator operator out there in a building out behind the hospital, and the round hit right between his generator building and the hospital there, and we we was being attacked, and he was running from the building trying to get to a bunker, and wounded him. So they didn't kill him, but he was wounded and had to take him around the emergency room. Or they did. I didn't get there until after they got him to the emergency room. But, and it put a big hole in the ground out there behind the ward where I worked on. And I've got pictures of them at home of the rocket.
You feel that they bombed the hospitals intentionally, or they didn't care, or what was it?
They had no control of the rocket. A lot of times the rockets go clear over the camp.
Mm-hmm.
They'd hit because they would bring the rockets in, and they maybe would set them up on two bamboo poles lashed together, and just aim it towards our base camp and hope it hit in there somewhere. So far as them really aiming at the hospital, they couldn't see. They didn't have any ground support or air support as far as aircraft, and there was no intention. They were just shooting rockets in, just to be shooting rockets in and hope they hit in the base camp, and it's just by chance that they hit at the hospital. They didn't care, really, obviously.
Now, you talk about base camp, and you say that this is probably used by the French and anybody else prior to our coming to this area. Now, this is not a fire base. This is a regular base camp, and it is a perimeter camp guarded.
Mm-hmm.
How long?
Tucson was enlarged while I was there. When I got there in '68, they were landing. It was basically set up as a landing strip. Then the 25th Infantry Division took over and set up a headquarters there at Tucson. I'm not sure what year they were there. I think they did that like in that's been early '67.
Did they have the whole perimeter of the town and all?
No. The town was not included in the wire. We had a 7-wire, and at an hour before sundown and an hour after sunup, the Vietnamese had to be out of our base camp. They had main gates, and all the Vietnamese that worked for us, like in our hospital, and then there was hundreds of them, worked on the base camp during the daytime.
Sitting in the trains, working
Filling sandbags, worked in kitchens, mess halls. And then we had a couple for interpreters at our hospital. They knew English, and then of course they speak Vietnamese. And these people had to go and come at them hours through that main gate, and were not allowed inside the base camp wires. They had seven wires, and then they had bunkers all the way around on the insides of the wires, claymore mines set up, and then everything a half mile outside the wire was barren.
using.
I don't know.
What do you suspect?
Well, I imagine they used defoliant to start with, and then they probably went in with bulldozers and pushed over the stumps and everything else that was left, because there was nothing out there. It was bare ground.
For half a mile?
All the way around the outside of the wire.
And then they had...
and I imagine they used something on it to keep it that way.
And then they had, they're using basic troops to guard the area.
Yeah, so your 25th Infantry Division headquarters was headquartered there, which was on another part of the base camp, which was over, like about 2 city blocks from where our hospital was at. And they were basically in charge of the security of the base camp.
This has been one hell of a big area.
Yeah, the landing strip was big enough to accommodate it wasn't, when I went over there, they couldn't take any jet engine aircraft. But when I was there, they extended the runway, extended the wire over on the east end of the base camp, and could land jet engine aircraft on that runway. That happened in '69 while I was there. All blacktop. Had blacktop paving streets. And most of them were South Korean Seabees. Just over there like in South Korea. And And some of the roughest troops fighting over there was Filipino and South Korean troops that were allies to the United States. They was ruthless because they sent over their best.
Well, if the Vietnamese had to be off the base before sundown after sun up, I assume that the American troops were not allowed off base that time.
Yeah, you was restricted to the base.
You weren't allowed off after dark.
Right.
Snow in the ground.
Well,
Unless you're on shore.
yeah, unless you were, and usually they went out and slipped on helicopters too. They flew out.
To the fire bases.
Well, to artillery base, fire bases, or which we had 3 around us.
What were they? What were the names?
I don't remember anymore.
Did you ever have to go out to the fire bases?
I flew over them. I seen them,
Yeah.
but they moved them occasionally. They didn't stay in the same place. They'd set up a fire base, and the houses would set up, and they'd have them dug in there with a small fenced-in area around them and the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Set up the claymores and the whole thing, and then maybe a month or so later, they'd move it around. They rotated around someplace. They wouldn't stay in the same place. That was for their own security. But you'd fly over them when you were flying in and out of CT, and you could look down and see them.
Were you allowed into the village at all in the day?
You could pretty much in the daytime go wherever you wanted to if you was crazy enough. I wasn't crazy yet. I went one time when I first got over there, early 1969. It was probably in January or February. I got a bright idea. I had very seldom did we get more than one day off. We worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and you got one day off. It didn't make any difference what day it was because they was all you were there, and there wasn't any place you could really go anyway. And for some reason, I got a 3-day pass. They gave me 3 days off in a row, and we've been working pretty hard. And so I got a bright idea. I'd go down to Saigon and spend a day or so. And I thought, well, I'll just go down here to the main gate and find out if there's a convoy going from CT. We were 12 miles away. That's not too far. It didn't seem too far. But you had to remember we were going 10 miles from Cambodian border. We knew the enemy was over there because you could, at night, if the B-52s were bombing the Ho Chi Minh Trail, they'd take our village, or our base camp. The ground would just be like a little earthquake going on. Light fixtures would rattle and some B-52 stuff. And so I caught I don't know what was all on that convoy. There was some laundry trucks and different things going down to Saigon, and I got in a booth and a half and going to ride down to Saigon, and I knew some guys down there that I went through training with, and knew where they was at, and I had talked to some of the other guys that had been down there that worked there at the Quality Bath, and they tell you where you could go to and where these guys is at, and you go down and see them and visit with them and stuff, and they'd show you around. It's better than going down not knowing anybody and not knowing where to go. And got in the truck and went down there, and man, I couldn't believe driving down this road in the back of a truck through Vietnamese villages, went through the little town of PT, and we had to make a turn in the road, and I later found out they'd been hit there on that corner, that intersection, the week before on this same convoy. Yeah. And when I got back, I said, I'll never do that again. I'm going to fly in a helicopter. Yeah. So from then on, I just go down to the helipad down there and say, are you going to Long Bend? And I'd be right inside the wires up in the helicopter, and they'd say, yeah, we're stopping down there, dropping supplies off or something. And I'd just hop in, fly down there, and they'd set me down inside another base camp down there, and that was a lot safer.
So what was the... remember now, what was your impression of the medical care that the CPTC faced in general?
Well, for the majority of the doctors we had were had been in practice for a period of time. They knew what they were doing, especially a surgeon. They seemed to be extremely up on what was going on. They were very professional. I don't think they could have gotten any better care in a situation different than what we were in. We had the physicians as close to them as possible, and as far as from the time they were wounded until they could get them there in a helicopter. We were in a position as close as we could probably get and have that professional of a person to actually perform surgery on them and have the kind of surgery they had available. We had just about every kind of neurosurgeon. We had one of the best orthodontists, oral. I've seen guys with their faces almost completely gone, and we put them all back together. We had a lieutenant come in one time and took them around right between the teeth, cut the front two teeth, and it went down through the jaw. He'd been hit by a sniper. Got went through his jaw and into his shoulder, and the bullet lodged in the back of his shoulder. Completely shattered his jawbone. Nearly blowed his whole jaw right off his face. It was just flat laying there down on his neck. And about all his teeth, but about 3 on the top on one side were gone. And just you couldn't believe that, what do you do with something like that? A shattered jawbone. It just shattered it to pieces. And he got him all wired back up. He was in surgery, I don't know how long. But on just a massive wire, taking all them bones back up, the little pieces in there, and got all that jaw back on his face. Removed a lot of bone fragments and things, and wired him all back up. And when he left the hospital, he was in pretty good shape. All he had was a little opening right there between the wires to get a straw in, and that's all we could feed him was through a straw, liquid. And I worked with him for quite a long time. He also had malaria. That's why I got him. He'd been wounded and had malaria, which happened quite good. Guys would have a small, just starting in to having malaria, and just mild actually. And then they get wounded, and then they come to the hospital and take blood samples from them, and they find out they had other problems besides the wound.
Do they have any malaria preventive programs at all?
Yeah, we had on our base camp and sprayed once a week. That's what they told us was a pesticide. With a helicopter that sprayed with booms. Flew over early on a morning, usually when the wind wasn't blowing or something, they'd spray the whole base camp. I hope it's pesticides and not Agent Orange. And then we also had once a week, we had a chloroquine, prinosine, phosphate malaria tablet, which was a large orange tablet. It was taken once a week.
What was that called? Chloroquine,
prinosine, phosphate, malaria tablet.
So I know so I trouble typing that one.
Yeah. The reason I know that is because I was a medic and I handled a lot of them out.
Once a week on the
they were
malaria.
That tablet was a once a week tablet. And it did have some side effects. Nausea, diarrhea, usually a day or two after you'd taken it, you'd have one kind of problem. Which really made for a good atmosphere. Then you also had Dapsone pill, which is a small white pill, and that's another story completely. It was to be taken once a week, once a day. In the field units, the guys were out in areas where the shooters were at, the guys that were what we called in Vietnam the grunt, the down pounders. they usually would take the white malaria pill besides the orange one too.
Mm-hmm.
But there was some side effects to it also.
What were those side effects?
They were, they'd have a reaction to them. And due to me being told by a doctor not to elaborate on that any time for the rest of my life, we will not go into that anything.
There would be a reaction to the pill.
Uh-huh.
You had no antibiotics? Which was standard, which was a synthetic quinine, which we used in World War II?
No, I'm not quite familiar with that.
Did you take both of these? Or did you
No, I just took the orange.
Have we pretty well covered, do you think, our medical career? What else? What was a typical day at the hospital for you? Starting at 7 a.m. You'd have 28 patients. And,
7 a.m. you'd go in, the night shift, of course, would have the guys on our ward, the ones that were able to get up and clean themselves and shave and get ready for breakfast. Have them going. The ones that couldn't, you worked them. Started on some of them and started to hygiene on the ones that couldn't help themselves. Then the day shift would come in and help out on things, and that's the ones that the night shift, where they were less staff at night. It'd be like one medic and one nurse. And then on days we try to have two medics, and then we had the ward master, and then usually one nurse, and sometimes two nurses, depending what the schedule was. And then they'd come in with food carts, and you'd have to help feed the ones that couldn't feed themselves. And on the malaria ward where I was at, we always had the crazy blood drawing. We'd have to draw blood on patients that hadn't been diagnosed with the kind of malaria they had. They still was drawing blood on them 4 times a day. And you had to work that in between too, draw blood on some patients for blood samples. And of course, in just standard procedure, you usually took blood pressure, you took temperatures on everybody's temperatures. I got so tired of checking down thermometers. You try and do 28 patients, you give each one of them a thermometer and take them all down. We didn't have some of the modern conveniences like we got in the hospital today.
printouts and all that.
Digital readout on a thermometer. We had the old glass ones, and once in a while you break a few. Of course, if you had a patient that was real sick, had malaria bad, they'd get to the point that they'd be kind of out of their minds, and you had to be on your toes watching them. We had those that was in our ward that was the drug abuse. And you've never seen anything until you've seen somebody coming out of a high on drugs and a withdrawal symptom. Unbelievable. I've seen guys laying on a bed, and the bed would be jumping off the floor, going through convulsions from drug abuse withdrawal. And they'd just be screaming as loud as they could scream. And they got themselves in the position. We were giving them synthetic drugs to try and bring them down slow on it, but it wasn't enough to get, they were going to have symptoms of withdrawal anyway. And drug abuse over there was not very successful because of the time factor.
You mean drug abuse prevention?
Yeah. They'd come, for rehabilitation, basically, when they come, we'd get them at the hospital. They'd already be hooked on drugs, and want to get off of them before they had to come back to the States, and they come to the hospital, try to get off of them, and they'd never give you enough time. I mean, you just don't do that in a week or two. If you've been shooting it up, mainlining for 6 months, you just don't take them off of it.
What would they do? Just get them as far as they could and shove them on?
Well, yeah, when they're time to rotate back home, their dates to come home would come along. Well, the guy'd want to go home. He didn't want to stay in Vietnam, whether he was still a dopey or not. And so we just send them out. You know, the paperwork would come through that their time was done and there was time for them to be sent home. So there wasn't any choice on us. We were in evacuation hospital. We weren't supposed to keep them for any length of time anyway. Mm-hmm. So we'd rotate them on out and send them on home. And most of them went maybe a long way from being cured when they left our place. I mean, they was, and then I believe a lot of them just never made it. You know, they couldn't. What they was going through, the initial right there at our hospital was so tough for them that they couldn't keep going that way. It was just too tough. And withdrawal symptoms were tearing them up. And they was really hooked on it.
Never killed them.
Oh, yeah, heroin killed a lot of them over there. We never seen them in our ward. They didn't die in our ward after we got them there. We was trying to get them off of it, and they didn't have access to it. So, usually they had their mind set. They was wanting to get off that bad enough, they was going to leave it alone once they come to us, you know. But there was a lot of guys just overdosed over there. That was very common. And of course, we never seen them at the hospital. They bypass our hospital and go directly to the morgue.
Mm-hmm. Were there women nurses as well as male nurses?
Mostly women.
Mostly.
Yeah, I worked with captains. I worked with a lieutenant colonel. All women, all RNs. I worked with lieutenant, and I worked with second lieutenant. Mm-hmm. The nurses that first come over there were what we call butter bars, second lieutenant in the Army. And what most of them had done was for their training in nurses to be RNs, they volunteered for the Army, which would, they'd have to spend so much time in active service if the military paid for their schooling to become RNs. And so I worked with American girls as far as nurses, but they were still officers. So I was enlisted men.
Were there any no enlisted women in the back hospital?
Yeah, I think we had there was very few. There was one that was a dental hygienist, I think. She worked down in a dental clinic. And she wasn't an officer. She was I think she was a special four. That was E4 rank. And but there was very few. Most what we had over there was nurses, and they were officers. Yeah.
Were you treating the Allied troops also? Were you treating Koreans and New Zealand and Australians?
Well, where we were located, you didn't see any Australians. Australians were mostly on the coast, down south around Vung Tau. When I went to Vung Tau, which was a peninsula out into the Gulf of Tonkin, that's where all the Aussies were at. They were around there like flies. Mm-hmm. But Vung Tau had never even been hit by the Vietnamese. It was a pretty secure. Well, it was an in-country R&R center for the Americans. But that's where the Australian space camp was, the headquarters.
Did you take R&R or did you get R&R?
Yeah, that was one thing I did. If I figured while I was over there, if the government was going to send me over there to do a job, and I built up the time that I could take leave and R&R, I was going to see some of the world that I'd probably never get a chance to see any other time. So in October of '69, I built up enough time. I'd been there, well, since December, so that'd be 10 months. I had enough time then that I could pick leave and go about anywhere I wanted to. And I went to Singapore. Spent a week in Singapore, and then since I was there just before Christmas of '68, I was going to be there. I extended for 2 months, so I wouldn't have to pull any duty back here in the States when I got within 5 months of being end of my 2 months duty or 2 years duty. And if you get within 5 months and you're in a combat zone, they wouldn't reassign you; they just let you out. So I wanted to do that, and I had fairly nice in Vietnam, especially the last couple months. Now back in the middle of '69, I really had it rough. I lost a lot of weight. I got down to 145 pounds, the lightest I'd ever been since I was a little kid. I lost about 35 pounds.
Wow.
We was working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. We was being rocketed, and I guess it was just I was working hard. It was hard work, intense work, and you had the constant fear of one rocket, the next rocket might have your name on it. That was the talk all the time, and it was constantly on your mind. It was probably a lot less than the guys that was out in the bush, but I was vulnerable to a rocket attack as much as anybody else. And nerves probably had a lot to do with it. I didn't eat bad. I had good facility mess hall to eat in over there. The hospital had the best because the patients would make comments that they hadn't eaten any better than what we were fixing there at the mess hall at the hospital, and especially in Vietnam, and we did have a good mess hall. We had probably as good a mess hall at the base camp at our hospital as far as I've seen here in the States while I was in the basic training in the IT. And it was rather new. I wasn't very old over there. It was a fairly new building. And, of course, they'd ordered about the best of everything, the stainless steel, everything that, like you'd have in a cafeteria style here at mess hall here in the States. And we had good cooks, and the hospital's got priority on cooks. And then some cooks cooked for us, too. So, as far as eating, I was very well off there. I never had to eat out of a box with 2 rations. Just never had to do it. And we had to feed the patients on the ward because they brought the food in stainless steel carts like you would have in a hospital, military hospital here in the States, right down the sidewalks with the roof over them, and from the mess halls down to the wards to feed the patients. And there was good eating over there. Although as far as food, it was probably as good as you could expect. But I still lost weight.
So you went on R&I to Singapore. What else did you see?
Okay, the second Christmas I wasn't about to spend in Vietnam. I went there and spent Christmas in '68. And like I said, I was going to extend for 2 more months, so I'd get within the 5 months, and I'd be eligible to just get out of the service completely when I come back to the States. And so, December '69, when Christmas time came, I signed up to go on R&R. We were allowed 1 leave and 1 R&R in the year we were in Vietnam, which we built up the time. And so I went to Sydney, Australia. And while in Sydney, in fact, I went with one of the guys that was at the 12th attack. It was a friend of mine. He went on the same flight, and we planned so we'd have somebody that we did know while we were down there, and we'd run around together a little bit while we was down there. He went, I think, a day or two before I did, and we was there for, about 4 days together. Do a lot of sightseeing. We went water skiing, and we made Christmas dinner at a family's home. I'll tell you, talk about homesick. The Australians made you real homesick. They appreciated you. And they knew you were an American soldier, and they really made you feel at home.
How did you get this relationship with? Did you come to service?
Yes, when you got there, it was all set up through volunteer organizations in Australia with the American Overseas Servicemen's Center. And as soon as you got there, they had sheets that you could sign your names up if you would like to have Christmas dinner with a family. And there was all kinds of things you could say. Well, I signed up for that water skiing trip. I signed up for a tour of Sydney Harbor on a tour boat. And some of them, there was some fees you had to pay. I think the water skiing trip, we had to pay some expense because we had to travel in a bus to a river. We couldn't ski in the harbor at Sydney, sharks. We had to go to a freshwater river up on the Empire so we didn't have the problem with sharks in the ocean.
Did you stay with the family Christmas Day then?
Well, we just went there to eat dinner, and it was really nice. They had a little Christmas present for us under the tree, and there you was, and her on the other side of the world, and it was hot. Christmas in Australia is the hottest time of their year, and weather was real warm. It didn't seem like Christmas as far as the weather, but like I said, we went water skiing, and so but it was really nice, and I enjoyed Sydney, really did. It's a beautiful city. It really made you think about the state, and like I said, it made you real homesick. And then the thing that really, in the hotel I stayed in, I called all the way home, talked to Mom and Dad and my girlfriend, and there was some other family members at home. They got a phone where they could all sit and talk, and I could hear them all, and they could hear me. And half an hour, and it cost $100. That's pretty cheap now, probably.
You or them?
I reversed the charges. Dad said, "You call, I'll pay it." That was Christmas present for all of us, I guess. And because I'd been away for over a year, and I just informed them that I was staying for another 2 months in Vietnam. I wasn't coming home in a year's time. I was going to stay another 2 months. I was going to be over there a year and 2 months total. And that didn't go over too pretty good either at home. So, but when it was all over, some of the experiences I had, I trained 3 men to take my place. We had all the people in the world in 1970. Of course, I went over in 68, in December 68. I was there all of 69. And right in January of 70, we got, I don't know how many more new medics. And just 6 months prior to that, like in August, September, we were so short of people, we was working 7 days a week. And there was even some days I worked 24 hours there for a while. That's when I really lost a lot of weight. I was sleeping on the ward with the patients. I'd go back and just curl up in the corner and try to sleep, and then some patient would wake up and holler or something, and I'd have to run. Then when it was close to my time to leave, I had 3 guys to train to take my place. Couldn't believe it. I could have used 1 or 2 of them earlier because of the shortage of people. But for the last 2 weeks, I didn't really do too much. I trained them. I had a month's training. I trained them for 2 weeks, and I showed them the ropes, and I said, "Now, if you got questions, you ask me questions in the next 2 days, because I said from then on, it's going to be yours. I'm not going to be around. I'm going to be going around taking pictures, and my last 2 weeks of here, it's going to be my time." And so I spent a lot of time going around, seeing things, taking pictures. I bought me some stereo equipment, had it shipped home, and just getting ready to go home, packing stuff up and sending stuff home. And, then we flew down to Long Bend, got on the plane, same place where I'd flown in, went through the same rigmarole and the buses and getting on the military planes. Of course, over there we called them freedom birds.
Mm-hmm.
When you seen one in the sky, you knew it was a freedom bird because it was a civilian aircraft. It wasn't a military helicopter, it was a military bomber, it wasn't a military fighter jet, it was a civilian aircraft, and you knew it was a freedom bird. Everybody was looking forward to the next trip on a freedom bird. Got on that plane and flew from Long Bend, and they took off real steep and they landed real sharp. They never took off and landed like you did in the States in Vietnam. They didn't want to fly very low to the ground. They wanted to take off and get up in the air. So flew to Japan, and real early in the morning we took off from Japan and just come through the clouds, and I had my camera with me. I like to carry the camera. And Mount Fuji was sticking right up through the clouds with a big snow cap and a sunshine shining on it, and got some beautiful pictures of Mount Fuji as I was leaving Japan. Of course, the fear was we got a long way from Japan to California. Mm-hmm. And everybody, the pilot come on and said, well, if we have to, we're going to stop in Alaska to refuel. If we don't have to, we're going to fly right on to Oakland. Well, everybody was saying, well, let's get to California as quick as we can, so let's go take any chances, man. And so we flew 9 hours. We got a tailwind, and we was in that airplane for 9 hours from Japan to Oakland, California. And man, that plane was starting to get looking awful small. I never could sleep on a bus or nothing. I was awake the whole time. And of course, your nerves were anxious to get home and get out of Vietnam. You were done. You survived it. I didn't have a scratch on me nowhere. I never was wounded or nothing. And spent 14 months over there and was on my way home. All them guys around in the plane kept hollering was, don't land it in the ocean, don't land it in the ocean. And we landed at San Francisco International Airport. And you're coming in right over the water, right over the bay, and looked for sure like we was going to land right in the water. We got down and they busted us over to Oakland. And then I got all my paperwork, got out of the Army. Of course, they wanted me to re-up, and they offered me any hospital I wanted in the world, giving me a rank to be E6 in 6 months. And I asked them where I would go after the 1 year. I said, how long will I be at the hospital I picked? Any hospital I want in the world, how long will I be there? I said, 1 year. And I said, what about the other 2 years I got to sign up for? I said, well, we can't guarantee anything on that. And I said, I ain't going back to Vietnam again. I said, I only made 14 months over there without a scratch. And I'm not going back. Of course, February 1970, Vietnam was still going on pretty strong. They were talking about getting out, but there was still a lot of personnel in Vietnam in early 1970. And a lot more men were killed from then on. And but I was probably there in 1969. There was more people killed in 1969 than all of Vietnam, and I've seen a lot of them wounded, seen a lot of stuff that I'll never forget, and got out of the Army. I told them I wasn't going to re-up. I couldn't get a flight out of Oakland, so I got me a cab and went all the way back around to San Francisco. And of course, it was February of 1970, and I was really dark. I'm dark reflected anything. I'd been over there in the sun, and I was really dark and panning out in the sun. So It's cold here. It's February. I flew from San Francisco International to Chicago O'Hare Field, and I called my folks in Chicago. They didn't know. I called them in California when I first arrived, but it took me 2 days to clear and get out of the Army and everything. And I told them I'd let them know where I'd be. I'd give them a call. So they was kind of anxious to know where I was and what had happened. I called them. Next time I called them, I was in O'Hare and Chicago. Called them up and I told them I was in O'Hare, and they couldn't believe it. They said, "Man, we're going to leave." I said, "No, you're not." I said, "The weather is pretty bad. It's snowing, and it was really cold up in Chicago. I could not believe the difference in temperature. I was frozen. Of course, they issued a summer green. They didn't give us any winter clothes when I left Oakland in the uniform. And in O'Hare, I'll get off of the plane and walking around O'Hare, and the snows are falling, snow all over the ground. 17th of February, and so I caught a flight from O'Hare on a small twin engine to Kokomo. And I landed in Kokomo. It took 20 minutes to fly Air Wisconsin from O'Hare to. I told them, I said, "I don't want you driving up here to Chicago." I said, "I'll just fly to Kokomo, and you meet me at Kokomo." And I told them the time the flight would be in, and so I landed, and big reception. Folks, cousins, my mom's family's all from Kokomo. Of course, they all come out. And I had a cousin, the first cousin from Kokomo, my mother's brother's boy, and he'd been in Vietnam in '68. And he'd come home, and we'd pass each other over there. He was in Vietnam until early '69, and I got there in late '68. So we'd pass each other over there, and they had the same reunion when he'd come home, kind of a get-together, too, for him. And so they was all waiting on me when I got to the airport at Kokomo. And great to be home, I'll tell you. It was.
And you picked up your life from there?
Yeah, I had 90 days before I had to go back to Chrysler Corporation to work. I had 90 days to keep my seniority. And, of course, my military time counted onto my seniority over there. And if I wanted to keep it, I had to go back to work in 90 days. I took 89 days. I took 3 months, and I couldn't believe how Wabash had changed. I was going away for 14 months, and I don't know whether Wabash changed so much or I'd changed so much. I don't think Wabash probably as much as changed as I was. A lot of friends I had that I'd run around with in '68 were married or was in the service or wasn't around. Most of them, that were in the service, a lot of them wasn't even around at all, and a few of them were married and they didn't want to run around with some single guy. They had a wife now they want to run around with, and so. It was a big change for me. It was pretty hard when I come back. And then the attitude of people. They didn't want to, you told them you'd been to Vietnam. Most people that I knew, of course, knew I'd been there. But they didn't want to really talk about it too much. They didn't want to hear about it. Of course, right then was probably a low for the Vietnam War. 70s was the period of time where people were trying to figure out whether or not we really should be there. And here I was coming back right in the middle of it from being over there for 14 months. I'd went on the pretense that I was helping our government. I was helping their people. And I believed that at the time. I don't believe that now. I don't think we helped them at all. We killed thousands of those people. I heard the B-52 strike. We killed thousands of Cambodians. How do you help people? By killing off thousands of them. We went there to help them, and supposedly to keep communism out of the country. And we slaughtered thousands of them. We dropped napalm on them. We destroyed whole villages of people, men, women, and children, with napalm. And we were there to help them. I look back at it now and wonder, who was making decisions? Why were we dropping B-52 bombs, thousands and thousands of tons of bombs we dropped over there? And I think most of it was economical. We had thousands and thousands of tons of armament that somebody wanted to get rid of over here. And weapons, unbelievable. We left nearly 80,000 M16 rifles in Vietnam when we pulled out in 1975. And that's why the North Vietnamese are one of the strongest armies today. The United States government supplied them with their armament. We left them ships, we left them planes, we left them helicopters, and we left them 130,000 tons of ammunition to go along with all this stuff. We just pulled out and left it.
As an enlisted man, what would your appraisal of the situation? What should we have done?
Well, the whole thing stems back to Ho Chi Minh. Of course, I've done a little more research probably most people ever want to even think about, since I was there and interested. If we, as Americans, would have listened to Ho Chi Minh wasn't communist to begin with. He was an independent. He didn't want to be communist. The United States made him communist. We refused to meet with him in Geneva. He was there to meet with us. We said we'd send a representative, never sent one. And all he wanted was he just wanted all the military people out of Vietnam. He had one country then. He didn't have a North and South Vietnam. The United States created North and South Vietnam. We took a parallel and we said, okay, everything north of this parallel is north and everything south. Well, it stems back to World War II. Mm-hmm. The Japanese soldiers was in Vietnam, and America sent, after Pearl Harbor, sent the British, took North Vietnam, and the French took South Vietnam to get the Japanese soldiers out. And the French never did leave South Vietnam. And all Ho Chi Minh wanted was he just wanted everybody out. He had his own army, was having problems. Mm-hmm. All he wanted was, he just wanted to get all these foreign armies out of here, out of my country. Just get them out of here, he said, and then I'll let me deal with my own civil war. And we should have never gotten involved to begin with. I mean, we ended up killing thousands and thousands of Vietnamese people and Cambodians. Well, how many would he have killed if we'd just let him go? Couldn't have been much more, I wouldn't have thought.
600,000. The figure that they killed.
That we killed?
Well, figure killed. We or someone killed them. We have to say someone first, right?
I'd say that's very conservative figure.
Yes, 600,000.
Yeah.
Now the shoe seems to be on the other foot, and the Vietnamese, which is the unified country, are saying you came over here and you spent billions to film this place apart. How about spending some money for reparations and help us for the goods you're putting in the Well, remembering, we did it to Japan, we did it in Germany, we've done it every place else. We did it in Korea.
I think we've helped them a tremendous lot already.
In what respect?
We got $5 billion worth of armament sitting over there.
But the armament obviously is not going to help the average person. I think what they're talking about is some kind of a Marshall Plan.
We can't help the average person anyway.
In Japan?
We can't help them. We can't even help them in Ethiopia.
Yeah, well, I mean, looking
at the government is going to take anything you give them and do with it what they want to. The guy that's barely surviving and eating is not going to ever see it. And it's we got too many problems in our own country.
But I mean, basically, looking back now from a 10 or 15 years perspective, you would say that forget Vietnam and what's going on in other countries.
I would say that as far as the monetarily helping them, if it was something in the in the line of food or something like that, I would agree to something like that. But even that is not. I mean, that's going to be tenacious somehow. But I don't think we can help on people anymore than what we have. We still got a lot of bloodline in Vietnam. Military men have a lot of offspring over there. And I've seen a lot of it. I visited an orphanage while I was over there. And almost every one of them in there was black kinky hair or lightheaded. And their eyes weren't slanted as much as they should have been. And pitiful. I mean, it was pitiful to see.
Of course, there's a move underfoot now to admit those children into the United States.
No, I agree with that. I'd say that if there is proof that
it's just like the proof is going to be what they look like.
Yeah.
There's no question.
Yeah. If they got the resemblance to see that they were American fathers, well, I'd say that, that our government has a responsibility for them because our government sent the men over there to begin with. Not any different than my children here in the United States. The way I see it.
What is your opinion about the protesting that was going on while you were doing this, or were you conscious of it, or when you got back, or any time you were conscious of it?
A lot of protesting going on in '68 when I went over. Late '68, a lot of guys went to Canada. Crossed my mind. I made a decision on that. I had to make a decision. When I had them orders and I was getting on that plane at O'Hare Field, do I get on the plane going to Oakland, California, or do I get on one going to Toronto or Montreal? The protest was definitely a factor. I mean, it was on the news. You knew that there was people that was against the war. In '69, I find out after I come home, '69, right here in Wabash County, Manchester College had a very loud protest for it. A group went to Washington from Manchester College to protest. Now that I look back and see what the war was, my time there was meaningless. I spent 14 months of my life and risked my life over there. For what? We handed it to them in '75, 5 years later after I left. So are the protesters wrong? I say that makes them pretty right. If we're going to end up 5 years later handing it to them. Unfortunately, I wasn't one of them from Manchester College protesting in Washington, D.C. I was one of them who was over there. Or fortunately, whichever the case may be.
Was there anyone in the Army or anyone outside in your area that was trying to influence you or make this decision? Did you run across anybody?
No, after I was in the service, it was
straight arrow.
You made a decision on maybe Canada, but as far as the protesters ever really influencing you, you've seen signs of it at airports and things, especially out in California, Oakland International. You get the weird looks when you was walking by in your uniform. You knew who the weirdos were. In fact, you were a little bit afraid of them because you were a loner. There was nobody with you, and there may be a group of them. But that was mostly when I come home on Saturday.
When you came home, did you put your act together and marry this girl from Manchester?
No.
Things had changed or everything?
Yeah. Sherry was all decided on getting married, and I was definitely not in the frame of mind to get married when I come home. I'd seen too much. I'd been through too much. And when I come home, everything had been such a change. Mentally, I wasn't ready for anything like that. She wanted to get married, and I didn't. And I told her if she wanted to get married, she better find somebody that wanted to marry. And That might have been pretty hard. That was awful hard for her. It was pretty rough on her. She called me quite a few times after that. And she just caught me with something that I wasn't in the right frame of mind at the time for. That was the last thing on my mind. And I didn't want to have to even think about it. I was still having nightmares. My mother woke me up and I about scared her to death one morning. I was standing in front of her before I got completely awake. She came to my room to wake me up one morning, and I had to tell her never to do that again. I said, you holler for me from some part of the other part of the house. Because I had geared myself to be such a light sleeper that I could get up and run to a bunker. It's the slightest thing. And apparently I was dreaming that morning about something, and she hollered at me, and she'd come in and open my bedroom door and hollered at me from my bedroom door inside. She stepped one foot into my bedroom. And before I come to myself, I was clear up to her. I don't know what I was going to do, but I was clear to her before I realized where I was at. And that's why I took 89 days before I went back to church. I didn't do nothing. I slept late. I didn't have any responsibility. I wasn't going to take on any responsibility. I had enough money that I'd saved while I was in Vietnam. When I went over, I had a lot of money taken out of my paycheck. I had it put into a savings program. In fact, I was very poor in Vietnam. I had just barely. In fact, my folks even sent me money a couple of times because I was putting it all into a savings account because they allowed us to draw 10% interest while you were in Vietnam. The government paid you that on your money. Of course, they were paying $10,000 to a lot of guys that died too, a little over 58,000. And I come home. I bought me a new car. I bought a 1970 Charger. Looked sharp, was sharp. Went back to another old girlfriend when I broke up with the one I'd had. And started dating around a lot of other girls. I just was a drifter, I guess you'd say, a loner. I was still a loner. Mm-hmm. I was in my own world, and nobody was going to tell me to do anything. I'd had orders given to me for 14 months. I had to be here.
Tom, here we are in our second session, which may or may not be shorter than the first session that we did. And let's talk about, did you think, before you went to Vietnam, that your training was adequate?
Well, the biggest problem was they didn't know how to train us because they didn't know where we were going. So we weren't, you were an individual that was going to end up in Vietnam, and you weren't trained as a unit. So you had no idea what you were going to do when you got there. Specifically, I was trained as a medical corpsman, and that included such a broad range that it was impossible for them to pinpoint on one thing. They trained you how to load and unload a helicopter, best off. They trained you how to give shots. They never trained me how to draw blood, and that was one of the main things I did after I got over there. They trained you here in the States to do a lot of different things like a field medic would do with a field unit. But as far as actual hospital environment, they didn't key on that too much, which I eventually ended up by chance of getting into 12th Evac Hospital. which I didn't have any forewarning or knowledge of until I reached Vietnam. You received your orders. They told you that you had an MOS that was such and such. Mine was 91D20. At that time, it was 91A20 because I didn't have the rank, which is a medical corpsman, and that was a broad range. You could see you could have worked in a field dispensary where you was working with sick call. If the guys were sick and come in, or if they had scratched themselves or required maybe a couple sutures or something like that, you could have been in a small dispensary field unit. I think this is basically what Dr. Lyons was doing. He was with an artillery unit, and he was a doctor that oversees mainly the sick call. If it was more critical, you were then sent on to a hospital, which I was at working at. And then we also had medics in the field that were right directly with the unit, right in the midst of the fighting, and they were there in case they took casualties or something happened. Then they were also required to be able, if they called in death off, to be able to get the guys in their units that were wounded, depending on if they were ambulatory or if they were a litter, and know how to load them into a helicopter and get them out of there. So they could either be sent to, most likely to a hospital, so they could receive more treatment. And that's pretty broad range. How do you train in 8 weeks of training? You got to run it pretty thin. And much of it just didn't. I had no idea. We had no. There was no training given to us on oxygen tanks, the use of oxygen tanks, the handling of them, an ambu bag, which is used in any kind of an emergency room situation where oxygen and the lungs need to be started, takes place with CPR. Had never even showed us one that I remember in basic training or in advanced training. But that was the kind of things I ended up working with when I got over there. So, in my particular situation, as a medic being assigned to an evacuation hospital, my training was very poor. Now, for the guys that were in field units or in the guys that were medics on desktop even, they had fairly adequate training because we went into that quite a bit, because that was probably the broad spectrum of the guys, medics that were over there were in that particular situation.
What you keep using this term, desktop. Explain it.
I think what we call a QE, a split is what it was referred to over there as a military slang word. Army split was just a helicopter you see most of your National Guard units use now. Around here in Indiana, they fly, and you see them fly over occasionally. And a death off is one of them that's equipped with medical. It has a red cross on it on the side. It does not carry a gun on the side. There's no 650 caliber mounted on each side. Now the ones that are unmarked, that are strictly OD color for camouflage, they may have rocket tubes on the side. They could have a 60 caliber mounted on each side with a gunner on each side. And then we're used to transporting troops out to the field to fight and bringing them back in. But and then if they equipped one with red crosses on it, it had racks that they could hook litters in. It was set up specifically for litter patients, and then it could also put 4 ambulatory patients and have 6 litter patients on one desktop at one time.
A desktop then with the helicopter.
Yeah.
With the red cross.
It was an air ambulance.
Air ambulance. Wonder why they call them desktops.
That was the term that was used in the bush. The fighting man, if he was dusted off, or you called in a dust off when they land, of course they created dust. All helicopters do. And for some reason, the medical, the medevac, the airship, was referred to it as a dust off. So, because because they were usually taken back to hospitals that way. And I'm not sure how it started. That's what the term that you learn when you got there.
Did you ever travel in one of these helicopters?
Oh yeah, yeah. I transported patients that way, and then I flew. Even on my way home, I flew in a helicopter from my hospital down to Long Bend, mainly because it was the safest way to travel. It's much safer than going in a convoy, truck or something. And it was so much simpler for me because we had access to helicopters that was coming and going from one hospital to another, and all I would do was contact some guys that I knew. Of course, after being there for a year, you learn to know guys pretty well down that run the radio. The radio does, when they come in, our call sign or our handle, I guess you would call it, if you're a CB net, was Silver Minnow. That was the 12th Hospital, and if you were down at the emergency room and somebody radioed in for Silver Minnow, we have 2 ambulatory and 3 litter patients in a dust-off such and such, and we'll be landing in 5 minutes, and then you responded, Silver Minnow, receive transmission, we'll be ready for your landing. And of course, when they emptied out, well, there was a helicopter that was going somewhere, and a lot of times they were either transporting patients onto a different hospital or records. We had a lot of record keeping, was unbelievable. If you can imagine what it is in a modern hospital now, and then you try to put it into a situation in a war zone, and here you've got a guy that comes in, you've got his dog tag, and all of his personnel records, which includes his medical records, are somewhere, but you don't know where. And you don't take time to question what his medical background is. If he needs a leg amputated, you amputate the leg and you go on. You take care of him, and then you try and get his records caught up with him wherever he goes. And you created a new medical record for him. You took everything off his dog tags that you could get, the information you did have, which included his blood type, and of course his name, and you created a new medical record that would go in with his other personnel file whenever and however it ever caught up with each other. And you can imagine the turmoil, paperwork.
Did the North Vietnamese respect the Red Cross helicopters and the helicopters marked?
Surprisingly, in the time I was there, now that's the only time I can really say anything about that, because the period of time I was there, from December of 68, all of 69, and the first part of 70, first 2 months, we had very few times that we had a dust off that come in with a bullet hole. It did happen occasionally. They'd land one and they'd have a round or two to take it. But in that period of time, it wasn't as bad as it had been prior to that, apparently, from what I had heard from previous people that had been there ahead of me. They used to tell that a lot of dust-offs never come back, and they couldn't take off after they get them loaded. They'd put a round in them, and they'd lose oil pressure or something, and they'd never be able to take off. And and again, another thing was the dust-off pilot was very reluctant to land in a hot LZ, is what they call it, landing zone. He wouldn't set her down unless he was fairly secure. And there was the problem, because you had wounded men that was under fire, and they couldn't get out from underneath. They'd have a sniper shooting at them, and maybe pinned down, and wounded men. And here was a medic out here trying to take care of them, and he couldn't call a dust off in to get them out of there because they were in a hot LZ. And you couldn't get a helicopter pilot, which you can't blame him, to come out there and land a helicopter in the middle of a hot LZ to carry off the wounded.
were there many stop stops operated at night?
Oh, yes, sir. It didn't make no difference, day or night. In fact, most of your action happened at night.
Mm-hmm.
And majority of your wounded would seem like from about 11 o'clock on, because you was a pretty busy hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we had a lot of nights that were fairly quiet, too, because we weren't the only hospital, and there was different hospitals in different areas, and of course, they'd fly them to the nearest hospital, the closest one they could get them to, and we were south compared to a lot of fighting. We were halfway between Saigon and Cambodia's border.
This may sound like a funny question, but at any time that you were working in the hospital and you would see these casualties coming in, did the futility of war or the futility of what we were trying to do in Vietnam, or did you ever think that you were in the wrong place at the wrong time and maybe you were all, what were your feelings? Maybe I'm trying to put some thoughts in your head.
The thing of it was, is you worked with the South Vietnamese, or they worked for you.
Mm-hmm.
You were paying them. We actually paid them. And here they would come into your base camp. They'd work in your mess hall. They'd work as an interpreter. We had one interpreter in our hospital. She interpreted to the South Vietnamese people that come to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to know these people because you see them every day. It was just like a fellow worker on your job. And the thing of it was, you were in your mind, you were there because you were supposed to be helping these people. Well, when I was there, that's what I thought. I thought, well, we're trying to help them. Here's people that we are allied to that want us here, apparently. Maybe at that time that's how I felt. I don't necessarily feel that way now because I think that the majority of the South Vietnamese would probably just been glad for us just to get out and let it happen. But and then I always kind of wondered myself whether, like you said, it was futile. When you look back at it now, I spent 14 months of risking my life there, and it's now in the control of the people we were fighting. It looks very futile now. What a risk for what?
But you never had that impression when you were there.
While I was there, no. It was I had the sense. Of course, I was in a little bit different situation. I didn't see the people out in the villages. The ones I seen were coming to the hospital for help or worked for us in the hospital, and they wanted a job. They were doing it for money. The federal government paid them in Vietnamese money for coming, which was very nil, but they had a job, and it was a job to them. They'd come and work at home, help cook the food, and most of them didn't cook it. Most of them were helped in serving it, and served it to the patients and so forth. And them kind of people seemed to me like they were glad we were there. They had a job, or the ones that we did have one ward for Vietnamese people, they were definitely glad that we were there because we were helping them. They were sick, or some of them were wounded. We had a lot of them that come in wounded with gunshots through their abdomen or things. What do? You take care of them and do what you can do, and send them on back as soon as they get well enough to go back. So I think in that respect, we were there as a hospital. They wanted us there. We felt like we were doing something constructive. But that's the difference in being trained to kill and being trained to help people over an illness or an injury or an accident. It's a whole different story. If you go look at an infantryman, the federal government trained him to take life. And I wasn't there. I had not been trained to become a professional killer. And most of the men that went there were. They were trained to become professional killers. And they were. Lots of them were very professional. So there's a different enemy. The enemy was also professional too. They'd been doing it all their generation after generation, and they was on their own turf. And that's why we took 58,000 plus casualties.
Are you conscious, or were you conscious at this point, on any protest movement, even in the United States, or anything?
Well, when I left in '68, there was a lot going on. At the time, I wasn't really concerned with it. It wasn't too much in Indiana. A lot of West Coast, California, and a lot of your bigger universities. The year I was gone probably affected Indiana more than '69, from what I found out afterwards. '69, and the protests started getting into the Midwest and universities and Indiana, and there was starting to become a lot of turmoil about, is it right that we're there? Are we really fighting communism? Is it worth fighting over there for communism, against communism? And of course, we heard news over there, and we'd see some news, but it was fairly well screened out, and the protest parts weren't really given that much. I mean, when you're reading the Stars and Stripes magazine newspaper for the Army publishers, they're not going to be showing you front page protests on it. So, but it wasn't a big thing. It was very lightly covered, and while I was over there, you just wasn't aware of it. You just was isolated from it, really. And then when I come home in early '70s, it definitely was going on.
Well, how did you feel when you saw it going on like that?
Well, it kind of goes back to my feeling when I got out, and they asked me if I would re-enlist. They told me I could have any hospital I wanted in the world, guarantee it. I'd have E5 or E6 rank. I was already E5. I'd be an E6 within 6 months. And I could choose any hospital I want to go to and be there for 1 year. I said, well, how long do I have to enlist? They said, for at least a minimum of 3. And I said, well, what about them last 2 years? Will I have a chance of going back to Vietnam? And they said, well, we can't guarantee that. I said, I'm not going back to Vietnam. After I'd been there 14 months, it wasn't worth it for me to go back. I could see we were spinning our wheels. Been there 14 months, and here I am working on wounded guys coming in, and guys just completely ruined their lives because they were some of them was paralyzed for the rest of their lives. Some of them were going to be in wheelchairs for the rest of their life. For what? I had seen that for 14 months, and I wasn't going to go back and see it anymore. So I guess that's saying that I didn't really believe in it. Maybe that was a protest of my own. I don't know.
Self-protest, huh?
Yeah, in my own little protest.
I think that we have to come to grips with our own feelings, our own philosophies and thoughts and so forth. How about this has been a sensitive area to discuss, and that's the blacks in the Army and the relationship with the whites and blacks and so forth. What were your experiences?
Well, my best friend, I trained him. After I'd been there about 3 months, I had a new man come in, and I trained him as I'd been trained. Like I said, didn't get enough training here, so when they got you over there, they knew that. So they knew that they had to train you for what you were going to do there. You had a training period when you got there. He spent about a month training. And he was a black man, but he was different than most blacks. First of all, he was a Christian, and the other blacks were even talked about him like he did whites, because they knew he was different. He didn't act like this. He was probably my best friend. We were there together for 10 months, and we worked side by side for 10 months. I trained him, and we were together many a days working side by side on a patient. And I spent probably more time with him than any of them, but he was the only one. I lived in a hoot, with our barracks over there, 10 rough with pole folding rafters. That's about all it was, and it rock rickety old floor in it. Keep you out of the mud. But I lived in that hoot there the whole time I was there, and there were, half of them were black guys. And they had nothing good to say to me, and I just refused to say much to them. Most of them that I was around smoked pot, drank a lot of beer. They just like to get away from the war by using them means, and I didn't. I went to sleep about every night, it seems like, in the smell of marijuana smoke, and everybody else smoking it inside the barracks where I was at, and that was probably the most aggravating thing to me. I got tired of it. There was one other black guy that was in a bunk down away from me. He was kind of the same way. He got very tired of it because they'd stay up late at night playing cards and gambling and smoking their pot and drinking their booze. The rest of us had a 12-hour day to work, and them guys, most of them were on maintenance for the hospital, and they worked like in the daytime for 8 hours every day, and they didn't have to get up so early and work 12 hours like the rest of us. And it was frustrating because you couldn't do anything about it. You were too scared to do anything about it because you had to sleep in the same building with them. And you didn't know how crazy they was going to get some night on their pot. They get smoking that pot pretty heavy, they just liable to go real crazy and come up with a grenade gun down it or something. You just didn't want to make waves, so you just didn't say much or do anything about it. But that was probably one of the other reasons why I did stay in. The first reason was they couldn't guarantee me I wouldn't go back. And the second reason was I'd be in E6 and I'd have to command them. I'd have to give them orders. And I could see what was happening in the Army in Vietnam. And that wasn't a pleasant thing. The best arrangement was a black sergeant or a black officer. And I had a black lieutenant colonel who was a surgeon of our hospital for a while. He pinned Meredith, what was some bad, I can't remember what it was now that I got. Merritt had the same thing, and he pinned it on me one time, and that was about the only time I ever seen him. But he was the head of our hospital. He was my commander. He was a full bird colonel, and he was a black man. But it's different. He was a doctor. I also had a ward master when I first got over there that was black, and he was a dandy. In fact, he was the very first one that told me, "You keep yourself straight, and I'll see you get all the ranks you're going to get." And he was true. Sergeant Socket or Mattis at this time. Sergeant Mattis, and then I had a special sausage training. He wasn't black. And Sergeant Mattis was a dandy. He was a dandy, and he got me. He told he was even though he was black, he'd been in the army a long time. And he knew all about it. He knew what one of the black guys that was trying to go on the black power thing. And that was the big thing over there. Every time two black guys passed each other, they'd give the fist sign in the air that was black power. You got kind of sick of that. I don't know. It was something you had to deal with. You just survive through it.
Did you guys stick together and they stuck together? Was that stay together?
Yeah, pretty much. When especially the black guys that were into smoking pot, doing dope or anything, they were with a group of black guys that just come together. The black guys that didn't want to have anything to do with it, they were really lonely. Because the only guys that really they could associate much with was white guys, and the other black guys ridiculed them, made fun of them. They make comments like, "You keep hanging around that, you're going to be a white honky like them," or something like that. Just nonsense stuff. And, I didn't mind being called a white honky, I guess. It didn't make me any difference as long as it didn't mess me over somehow. They call me anything they want to do.
We talk about Agent Orange, I think we did. But anyhow, when we get to the transcript, if you and I have repeated, because it's been 2 or 3 weeks between talks, to scratch out what was repeated. And I can't remember whether we got into Agent Orange or not. Were you exposed to the best of your knowledge to Agent Orange?
I don't think so. As far as I know, I was. He was sprayed with pesticides, but not herbicides.
Had you taken the physical on Agent Orange?
Yeah, I did complete the physical. I went to Fort Wayne VA Hospital to take my Agent Orange screening, going through it, and I have to go back in September to see another doctor to finish it up. But don't think there's any problems there. I think I was pretty much I was far enough away from it. The thing that bothers me is I had guys that I was working on that come in and they were walking through it. So, depending on the severity of the area that he was in, the patient was in, if he was walking right through an area that was full of foliage that had just been sprayed hours before, and then gets wounded and sending him into our hospital, I guess you could say he was exposed. But how do you know that? There's no way you can know.
Sure. Do you have any nostalgia or desire to relive these days in Vietnam?
Well, I've always thought since I got back I'd like to go back to CC, the base camp.
You have a discussion about the nostalgia or whatever you want to call it, war or Vietnam, and you were giving me expressing your thoughts.
But I've always had a desire to go back to the base camp where I was at, CC, to see what happened to the Shelter Hospital. It's always interesting. What did the North Vietnamese do with a hospital? We had the building, we had the equipment. We didn't bring that home. I know we did. I mean, if you're gonna leave helicopters and that kind of equipment over there, you're not gonna bring home respirators and surgical instruments and and all that, I'm sure, was left to Shelter Hospital. And it's always kind of intrigued me. what in the world do they do with that? You know, are they utilizing it? The facilities there, did they have the personnel that they could bring in there to utilize that kind of thing? Did they just destroy it? You know, did they haul off what they wanted to use and destroy the rest of it? It's always kind of wonderment to me. The rest of the base camp probably could have been destroyed, but except for equipment and helicopters and that kind of thing. But what do you do with a hospital? We had thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment there. There's no doubt about it. I mean, we had a complete laboratory where you could run tests on everything. You could test on the type of malaria a patient had. They could run all the lab tests that you could run in any lab you got here in the States today, even just about, except that anything new that's been come up with. And what do they do with the lab? You know, what did the non-Vietnamese do with it? We had a dental clinic. We had dental chairs, you know. What do they do with that kind of stuff?
Well, maybe they use it.
Yeah, I hope they do. I really do. For the people's sake, I hope they're using it. But it would be interesting to me. We had a lot of buildings. And I would have no idea. You'd have to go to a supply sergeant. Thousands and thousands of sheets and blankets and bedding, mattresses. You know, what do you do with pillowcases? And you know, there's them things that's there. We didn't bring them home. I just kind of like to see what it looks like now. Is it all growed up and weeds? And everything's hollowed out? Are the buildings still there? They were beautifully painted white, a Quonset hut, with big red crosses painted on the top of it. Now, to me, I kind of wondered about that. They didn't even have any aircraft. What good is it going to do to put a red cross on top of the building designating it as a hospital if they don't have any aircraft? Their rockets didn't shoot at red crosses when they were shooting rockets in there at it.
You know, there's been a proposal by some of the North Vietnamese leaders that since the United States is so free and helping the South Vietnamese and fighting the North Vietnamese one day or another and spending these billions that we spend in Vietnam, that why don't we come back to Vietnam now and with reparations and help them get back on their feet? What do you think?
I think we talked about that.
Did we talk about that?
I think we did. I think we said something into the effect that I didn't think that we've given them all the help we could give them. I think we spent enough money there. Yeah. We left them enough. And I don't see spending any more money there. After all, the people we were fighting in is up in the country, and they're controlling the government. Why waste their time? I think what I said was maybe if we wanted to send food or something like that, if they needed that. Yeah.
I think you're right. Did we talk about veterans organizations?
Yeah.
What are your feelings about veterans organizations? What were your feelings and what are your feelings now about veterans organizations?
Well, when I come home from the service, of course I was aware of VFW, American Legion here in Wabash before I ever went to service. Knew they were here. When I come home, really never had any desire because everybody that I'd ever heard of that was members of them were usually World War II veterans, and there wasn't anybody my age, so I just really never showed any interest in it. Nobody ever contacted me or nothing, so I just let it go, and never was asked to join or never pursued it on my own, so never joined anything. This past year, I joined the Vietnam Veterans of America, and the organization started in 1978. and we're just starting a chapter here in Allback County and the surrounding area. And of course, it's going to be guys that went through the same thing. They were in Vietnam. Many of them prior to when I was there, and a lot of them when I was there, and some of them even after I was there. But, kind of like the old saying, you went over as an individual and you fought over there, part of a fighting team. And that's a conglomeration of the Air Force, Navy, and Marines, and Army all together when you talk about a team over there. But when you come home, you're an individual, and when you come back to Wabash County, you're an individual. And most of the guys that I've met in the Vietnam organization, the VBA, I didn't even know they were ever in Vietnam before I went to the meeting. And they've lived right here in Wabash with me, I didn't even, I could pass them on the street and never knew they'd been to Vietnam. I didn't have to know. And yet, you can sit down and talk with one another and have a lot in common.
Mm-hmm.
You went through an experience that there's very few other people going through that kind of experience. And I had it pretty nice in Vietnam. I didn't have it rough at all compared to most of them. But yet I can relate just on the fact that I was there. I went through the same process of getting there, went through the same experience coming home, and just because I was there and I was wearing a military uniform. In that respect, I can relate to the guy that was out there pulling the trigger and was a professional killer. He'd been trained to do it, and that's what he was doing. And I didn't have that position to be in, fortunately, but yet I can still relate to that person. I can sit and listen to him. And a lot of them guys need somebody to talk to.
Hey, you haven't been to the memorial in Washington?
I've never been there yet. I have all hope in the world of being there. I know a few names that are on there of guys that I tried to keep alive in the hospital. And it'd just be nice to look up there and see that name and know that I tried everything I could to keep them alive. And they were just in a condition where I could. There was no way that we could medically keep them alive.
Do you think it's a fitting memorial from what you've read?
Better than nothing. We had nothing for so many years. It's sad. They're right there as a case of the Vietnam veteran having to do it for himself. Our government wasn't willing to do it. A private individual that had been to Vietnam come up with the idea, and it was financed. He had to go and get the finances. Our federal government didn't do it for a Vietnam veteran. They had to do it themselves. They wanted a memorial to the 58,000 plus that were killed. They had to go and do it themselves to get it done. They organized things built. They designed it. And they raised the funds for it and seen that it was completed. I guess the federal government did help provide some land.
I guess so.
So I guess they did help to some degree, but in comparison to other memorials, for men that have died in war, it's typical Vietnam veterans. The American public didn't want to hear about it. They didn't want to hear about it anymore, and I think you still get that response today.
What's your overall reflection of having been there and now that you look back and see the results and you see what happened? And what do you think today?
Well, it seems like a dream. you think about. I remember every day I was over there, and then after I spent 11 months there, and I could go home, I made a decision to stay 2 more months after my 12 months was up, and I could have come home in about 11 months. It seems like at that time I thought, boy, every day was just a little slow, and so a 12-hour working day was such a long day. It seemed like it never ended. And now I look back at it, and it just seems like it was just a 2 or 3 nights dream or something. It just went so quick now that I look back at it. But 14 months was a pretty long time at the time I was there. Reflecting back on it, the only thing I can really say is I sure hope that we don't have a government that puts young men and women in a position that I was in again. It wasn't a war that was meant to be won, and we'd have done it, Gulf of Tonkin started at 64. It could have been, the whole thing could have been over easy in a year, and yet we strung it out for 10 years from the time of Gulf of Tonkin. And of course, they were fighting war before that. I mean, that was just when we really got into it. I would hope our government wouldn't put the way they put young people in a situation, a no-win situation. They took, on the average, 19-year-old people and put them with no direction of where you were going. When you left the United States, you were on a plane full of military personnel that had the same problem you had. You had no idea where you was going. When you got there, you were assigned with wherever you were supposed to go. All different people. You were strange people. You never worked around any of them before. A whole different personalities you had to get used to. And for my case, I was 20 years old. That's a situation to put a 20-year-old in, but I sure wouldn't advise it. I mean, it was crazy is what it was. It was flat out crazy. You don't put that kind of a strain on a 20-year-old without affecting them. Especially 19-year-old. It's going to affect them the rest of their life. Especially if they see traumatic situations, life and death situations that most of them are in them. And it obviously reflects on the suicide rate of the Vietnam veterans. And there again, the government put the individual in that position, a no-win situation. They brought him back and wasn't willing to help him. It's like commentary I heard the other day. The guy was in a firefight, and he was in a dusty old foxhole behind sandbags, and his rotation come up in 3 days, and they got him back the next day. He was in a dusty old tent back behind the line somewhere. Next day he's processing out, and 5 days from the day he was in a firefight where he was killing people, he was sitting in Chicago at a reunion with all these families in the backyard at a barbecue. What a transition. I mean, how do you, physically you can do that, but what do you do? What happens to you mentally? from killing to paradise, and what an adjustment you have to make. And obviously many of them couldn't make it. And it's too bad that our government puts people at a young age in that kind of situation. Obviously it's a life-threatening situation, even after, not only there, but even after they got back. And the average age of a man in World War II was 26. He trained with his unit. He knew everybody he was going to be working with. They went through training together. You put 6 more years on a age of a person, they're a lot more mature. I was 20 years old, didn't have no idea what I was going to do in life. You know, I had a job, I had a good job. But where was I going to go? I knew I was going to Vietnam. That's where I knew I was going.
This is an odd observation, I guess I'd say, that in the 14 or 15 Vietnam veterans that I've talked to, every one of them has been more than willing to sit here for half hours and 6 hours and tell me all their experiences. Why do you think this is? Is this the first time that you've ever told most of these stories? Or?
Yeah, then most of them I never. I'm a very talkative person. I like to talk. Talk too much a lot of times. And yet I've never had the opportunity. Nobody's ever had an interest. Nobody want to know what I did in a hospital in Vietnam. Everybody gets the idea of, man, that's got to be pretty gory, you know. Well, it was. You're going to see a lot of death in a hospital in a war. Obviously, when they land with a Chinook helicopter on the pad out there and the thing's full of dead bodies, and there was 1 or 2 that was wounded, and they drop them off, and the helicopter takes off and goes on to the morgue with the rest of the helicopter load, which is 20-some bodies. You're going to see a lot of death. And what an experience to have on a young person to be I wasn't exposed to any death when I was in Wabash County. I seen a few automobile accidents where there was some death, but an accident, seems like put it into a different perspective than when you're in a war, supposedly fighting for something. It wasn't territory, it wasn't boundaries in Vietnam. The main thing that I heard from the guys that were out fighting is they got to have that body count for the human needs. What a way to fight a war. And like I say, very, very few people have ever listened to me, wanted to listen to me. My sister had before. I had a younger sister, and it was so informative to her because she was 8 years younger than me, and she didn't even realize what was going on. When I was in Vietnam, I was 20 and she was 12, and she was, she didn't know what Vietnam was. And now she's old enough to, it's interesting to her what was going on, And she has listened to me here in the last couple of years. So sometimes she sit down, we get to talking about it. And my mother and father have listened to me talk about it, I guess that's fine, but nothing, usually with a certain situation that something happened that reminded me of that situation or something, you see an episode on television or something, and you say, well, I remember when something like that happened when I was in Vietnam, and then you tell about the incident, and then that's it,
On the other interview that we had there every month, did you have a hard time sleeping when you were home?
Yeah, I did. That's a good question.
I had this from others.
Yeah, I couldn't. I had a hard time getting sleep. Digs up your memory, I guess, and maybe I was sleeping probably about the way I slept in Vietnam many nights. I don't know. Although I was usually pretty exhausted, and I didn't really have a whole lot of trouble getting sleep if the guys were playing cards and having a party there where I was supposed to be sleeping. But yeah, I did. I didn't get to sleep very early that night. It's after midnight, and I got to get up at 5:30 to go to work, so I didn't get much sleep that night.
Anything else?
Is that terrible?
Usually, when I call and remind them that we're going to do this, the night before, they seem to have a lot of trouble sleeping because it's not enough. I'm fascinated by these stories, and every single one has been good. And I told the staff that when we started repetitions for day 6, I would quit. There's not a single person who does the same impression, reflection, occupation, or anything can do it once. And they've all been enlisted. I had no officers in that yet. And I find it fascinating. That anybody would want to sit and talk to me for 3 hours about what they did and what went on. Absolutely fascinating.
Well, it was experience you didn't know you were going to get into. You didn't know what you were getting into. It was an experience you wouldn't want to repeat, but it's a memory that you'll never forget. Little things that probably in your mind most times you won't ever even think about them, but once you start thinking about the whole situation when you're over there, you start remembering these things. They made a little impression in your mind somewhere, and you pick up on them.
It's sort of a chain that goes in your brain.
Yeah. And I hope that somebody else is interested in it, and I think that's a good thing. It's too good for me to talk about.
As I say, I'm just pleased that anybody wants to talk to me for a couple hours about what they did. And I know that 20, 30 years from now, maybe perhaps you and I, neither of us will be here. But for children and grandchildren will be sitting reading and saying, hey, this is this little mark in life, and it's part of the huge.
There's a lot less on by most people in the world to be carried on behind him. You think about thousands have been killed in Bangladesh this recently by storms. Unbelievable. Just wipes snow. War isn't near as bad as Mother Nature sometimes.
Anything else, Tom, that we should be talking about?
Don't think so. I don't think of anything.
I want to thank you for the 2 sessions, and this is the Wabash County Public Library Oral History Program. George Dinnerby.